Okay, I got it. Good afternoon. My name's Sue Kehoe, and I have written 2 books that may be of interest to you. However, first of all, I think I'd better introduce myself and give you a little idea of my background. I was born in England, but came to Canada when I was 9 years old. Basically went into Toronto, where I grew up in the north end of the city, and graduated from high school in North York. After I graduated, I held a lot of clerical positions, basically typing and just office jobs in schools and banks and eventually university. But I kind of got tired of that, and after a period of time I decided that I would go into nursing, and I became a nurse. And I spent 40 years in that profession, and it was a very demanding but an extremely interesting job. I got to meet a tremendous number of people under very varied circumstances, people that I probably would never have encountered in my private life, and I hope that I was a good nurse and was able to help them out. Some of the things, car crashes and things like that were devastating, and it was being able to work on a team and emerge and help people out, or be able to transfer them to a bigger facility where they could, have better care. All of those things were very important to me, and I don't regret being a nurse whatsoever. I only gave up my license 2 years ago, so I stayed in that profession a long time. It was very rewarding. So a lot of things from my nursing career I've been able to include in my writing. Characters, things that happened. There's little bits of that experience throughout my stories, and it's a very rich environment, because as an author you're always looking for things to write about and how to write about them, and that's been good. For my hobbies, I was always very interested in horses from a really young age, and had one of my own, a nice old quarter horse, when I was a young person. And I went in for rock collecting and gardening and dancing, and did a lot of needlework and a lot of art, and I just loved to read. So when I finally did retire 2 years ago, I decided that was the time to become an author. Now, in 2014, I had the good luck to go to Ireland with a friend, and we went on a bus trip around the whole country, and that really set things off for me. That was the beginning and the basis of my book called Ireland, Snapshots in Time. There were things on that trip, like, for example, our bus driver would point out an old church ruin, and it was built in the mid-500s. Now, we think 1800 is old in this country, but you think about something that was built in 500 at the time of St. Patrick. And that was the type of thing we were coming across routinely. Very old buildings, many different prehistoric peoples. You got all kinds of things over. I mean, Ireland is not much bigger than New Brunswick. So you get the scale of what happened in history in a small place like that over time. And I wrote, Ireland is 10 short stories about different things I saw on that bus trip. The bus trip story itself is a modern one, but I used the book to teach myself how to create the main character. In the Book of Kells, which is the ancient illustrated manuscript that's in the university museum there, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's unbelievable how it was done. And my main character is a small child, a young boy, whose parents are sending him to be a monk, and that's one of the things that he has to deal with. The next story is a modern day story of a young Canadian girl who is selected to go to a thoroughbred breeding stable just outside of Dublin, where she will apprentice and be taught how to look after broodmares and foals. And she comes, it's the tale of that period of time when she's learning. The next story is a fictitious biography of William Crotty, who was an Irish highwayman who had a wonderful time stealing from the rich and getting chased by the British Army, and they eventually, unfortunately, did capture him. So it wasn't a happy ending. There is a very brief story about the potato famine, which was devastating, and the circumstances under which it happened, which caused a huge wave of immigration. I believe in the mid-1840s, 38,000 people arrived in Toronto on boats who were refugees from the Irish famine. And the population of Toronto at that time was only 30,000 people, and all of a sudden all these Catholic Irish descended on them. So that was a huge event. That also happened in New York City too. Many of them went there. There's a short story about a pub, two tourists on a driving tour who go into a pub that was built in the 1500s. One of the longer stories in here is a story of a Celtic warrior who lives in a small village, who are all immediate family, and a raid takes place, and they leave to, he leaves with his fellow warriors, and they have to go over and rescue some of the people that were involved in that and get the return of the cattle. There's a story about a quarry. A lot of limestone and marble was quarried in Ireland, and there are different colors of marble, which you can see in some of the churches there. There's a red, there's a black, there's a green, and there's a white, and they're quite distinct. They came from different geological eras, and they're from different places, but you see some of these in these very old churches with the pillars, and they're made of the 4 different kinds of marble. So there's a story there about the quarry. There's one called The Family Tree, which is also a modern Canadian one, where a woman is searching her Irish ancestry, and it makes a huge impact on her life when she finds out some of the details. And the last story is about a violin maker who lived, he lived in Galway, and it's just at the time that Cromwell was sending soldiers over from Britain to destroy any Catholics and to take their lands. And many of them were either enslaved or killed or shipped off to the West Indies to be slaves on plantations. And it's a story of him and his family. And it flips to modern times when remnants of one of his violins is found by a young man who tries to trace it back to its origins. So it's got there's a lot of stuff in it that's history related. So the characters, of course, are fictitious. But anyway, that was my first venture into writing, and it was a good start. Now, book number 2, both of these books are available here at the library. They have copies. Book number 2 is called Nuggets, A Tale of the Caribou Gold Rush. And I'll just read the back cover for you because it pretty much summarizes what the story is about. In 1860s Victoria, British Columbia, 17-year-old Rob MacDonald is in love with high society Emma. But Rob, his father, and his brothers work at the Hudson's Bay Post, and their lowly position makes him an unacceptable husband in the British class system in which they live. Determined to win Emma's heart and the approval of her father, Rob leaves his family behind and joins a group of American miners heading north along the Fraser River, hoping to strike it rich in the BC gold rush. He must grow up fast in this uncharted and daunting land as he and his new friends face scarce food, wild animals, the violence of desperate men who will kill to get gold, and the lack of law enforcement to prevent it. It is a coming-of-age novel, part adventure and part Canadian historical fiction. It is the poignant and compelling story of how one young man sets out to find gold, only to find so much more. So that one was, I think, better put together. By that point, I had a few more years' experience writing. And, you know, there's no one correct way for an author to write. I've taken some courses, and like everybody who writes does it a bit differently. Some people start where they know the beginning, they know the ending, they know the whole bit in the middle, and they map it all out chapter by chapter. I tend to know the beginning and the end, and I know I have to have a crisis at the beginning to get my hero or heroine to do something, to solve. But I work my way through and create it as I go. So that makes it difficult sometimes, and it's never right the first time. You always go back and have to edit things. Where do ideas come from? Everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. Anything that's happened to you can be a subject for a story. It could be sports, it could be your friends, it could be something that happened to you. Sometimes I've driven myself crazy trying to come up with an ending, and I go to sleep, and when I wake up, somehow the answer is there. Now, I think I've heard it called the boys in the basement doing your work for you. Well, I can thank them sometimes, because sometimes the ideas aren't mine and I have no idea where they come from. You do need to have some alone time. Writing is something that is a solitary function, and but it has been an excellent way to pass the time. Being locked down with COVID, it's given me something to do. I think being able to write, even if you never publish, is a really good exercise for your brain. In order to, and I've just sent book number 3 in to be to the publishers. So you're going to get comments back from an editor, and you may not like them, but you have to learn to take criticism. That's one of the exercises in this sort of field. Are you writing for a specific target audience? Like, are you writing a hockey story for hockey fans? Excuse me. Are you writing a love story? You have to know to a certain degree who your audience are and what they are looking for. You don't write to please them, but you keep them in mind all the time. And then, of course, there's the whole thing of marketing your book, which is something I'm not particularly good at doing. You've got social media, you've got blogs, you've got Facebook, you've got all kinds of things that people do to promote their books. And of course, COVID shut most of that down too. However, there's a lot more online things, like Zoom meetings and all that. And I'm learning, as I'm doing right now. This is the first time that I have had an opportunity to take part in something like this, and I think it's fantastic. Although it's a bit nerve-wracking when you're doing it for the first time. The publishing company I am using right now is Friesen Press in Vancouver. And with that, I get access to Amazon. The next book, number 3, is called Tango, and it's a modern love story with some suspense elements. And I'm just starting to wrap up book number 4, which is a Viking Celtic saga. So all of the libraries locally within a 50-mile radius have got copies of my books, so you can borrow them from there. They are available on Overdrive for the library system. If you wish to buy them, they're available at Kerr's Books in Campbellford, Ashley's in Bancroft, Books and Company in Picton, Tweed News in Tweed, and Chapters in Belleville. And I do have an author's page on Facebook, and it's Susan Kehoe Author. So if anybody would like a copy, I am more than happy to deliver a copy locally. So anyway, if you have any questions, I think perhaps the only other thing I would like to say is when a person is doing historical fiction like I do, it is really important to get the details right. Like at one point I was writing a scene where young Rob here wants to buy a new rifle, and I wanted to give him a Winchester, but the model I wanted to use hadn't been invented yet, so I had to give him a Henry rifle instead. So that if you're writing historical fiction, the details count because they make it authentic. And that's important for that genre right now. Anyway, I thank you so much for listening to my lecture, and I hope I've given you some useful information. Thank you very much.